big ball. Going for the big shot, and he hits it.
That's batted into the air, intercepted, and the Bears are going to win it.
Combine week's officially here. Kickers and punters reported on Monday morning. We'll have linebackers, a couple other positions reporting throughout the week. This coming Sunday is probably the biggest day for the Bears offseason. That's when the offensive linemen are going to go through. They're going to start testing, doing all their drills, their interviews, all that type of stuff. Welcome into the Halas Beat, brought to you by the Bear Report. I'm Usayd Koshul. He is Nick Whalen. You can follow us on Twitter at Usayd Koshul, @ Nick Whalen, and at Halas Beat. Dude, the season, or I should say the off season, has kind of gone by quickly so far, and it has been one filled with nothing but storylines for the Bears. There's obviously another Civil War Part 2 taking place on Bears Twitter. We got people arguing about whether or not Rome Odunze was the right pick. We got people arguing that cutting DeMarcus Walker was a stupid move, but everyone seems to be in agreement that cutting Gerald Everett was the right move. I mean, where do we even start with whatever the weekend held on Bears Twitter? Because it was crazy.
Yeah, it was. It feels like if Bears Twitter isn't fighting about something, then they're not living, which is just a little bizarre. Roma Odunze is fine, y'all. I'm just not even going to go into that one. Let's talk about the cuts, because I think that's important. That's something that we had talked about in some of our previous episodes about potential cuts. So Gerald Everett and DeMarcus Walker both being cut saves around $10 million. And that's not their entire salary, y'all. There's going to be some dead cap that the Bears are going to have to absorb by cutting them, but they're going to save $10 million that they can spend in free agency, draft picks, practice squad, in-season moves, etc. So I liked both moves. I was one of the minority because there was this, I tweeted out just being super sarcastic, like, I didn't know how great DeMarcus Walker was until he got cut, and Bears Twitter talked about it. Like, DeMarcus Walker got overpaid from Tennessee, y'all, and the Bears bet on him taking another step. He never did. Actually, he regressed. He had 7 sacks in 2022 with Tennessee playing, and then 3 tech subbing in. He actually got a lot more sacks as 3 tech as a sub interior pass rusher. He had 7 combined sacks the last 2 years, and he didn't miss a game. And so, yeah, solid run stopping D end, but you don't pay $5 million for that. And then the other part too, man, is like, he's going to be 31. He's not going to ascend anymore. Like, he's reached his limit. He's not going to uncork a whole new repertoire of moves and skills. And he's not going to get stronger or faster. Like, he is what he is at this point, if not declining in terms of skills and, his body and injuries and stuff like that. So for me, part of it is like, you're going to waste a lot of snaps on a guy that, let's see what Austin Booker can do. And obviously they have a strategy if they cut him, like get some other pass rushers in here because they could take a step or they could continue to get better.
And really, the theme for this season in 2025 to me is going to be all about the young guys, right? Like, I'm going to be fully honest with you. I don't see a situation where DeMarcus Walker even really fit into what Dennis Allen was going to do schematically. Like, and first off, I should say this, right? So talking to DeMarcus in the locker room after games and stuff was always fun. But you also just got the feeling that, when the Bears signed him 3 years ago now in the 2023 free agency, I straight up said, I was like, all right, well, you know what? This is a guy that, given the 3-year deal and then the contract numbers came out, I said, this is a very real possibility that this basically ends up being a 2-year deal. Because when you looked him up, right, it's like you mentioned, he had the 7 sacks, and even then, like, he's really regressed since then. And unfortunately, people don't want to have these serious conversations, but like, the reality for this team is that if this is a franchise and this is an organization and this is a roster that's ready to take the next step, then you have to do what all the really good teams do, which is the really good teams identify a weakness and they say, hey, we are going to go ahead. We're going to move on from this weakness. We're going to overhaul the roster, overhaul that specific position, and just make it stronger and stronger and stronger. The unfortunate part is that the old Bears would have held on to DeMarcus Walker, said, well, we got some production out of him. He's a good veteran. He's a great leader in the locker room. Your typical, I guess, like Chicago Bears lingo. And then the reality of that would have pretty much been the Bears would have went into the free agency period as well as the draft and just probably been too patient. But this is Ryan Poles wanting to be aggressive. And it's I mentioned, last one. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, the part that I think that's refreshing is that Poles isn't being stubborn. Like he brought in Walker and then he's like, you know what, didn't work out, gonna get rid of him. And then the other point I'll let you go is it's tough for me to think of this next season because they're going to bring in some other DNs, y'all. It's not going to be just Booker. Like they're going to bring in some guys. It's tough for me to imagine sitting back and the Bears lose the game because they're not going to go undefeated next year. Be like, man, we would have won that game if we had DeMarcus Walker. Like I just can't even imagine that. Can you?
No, I can't. And the reason is because it's like the guy was a good player for a stopgap type, D-end, but then also you look at schematically the differences between what Matt Eberflus likes as well as what Dennis Allen likes. So DeMarcus Walker is 6'4", about 280. Now, you look at some of the edge rusher prospects that are going to be in the draft this year, like a Nick Scorton from Texas A&M. You look at some of these other guys, such as, to give you a little bit of a perspective here, right? Like a Shamar Stewart, for example, right? That's like 6'5", 6'6". Landon Jackson's a guy that's 6'7".
Landon Jackson, yep.
So the Bears cut DeMarcus Walker because it just wasn't about money. It was more so like, all right, older player, not necessarily ever going to get better than whatever he is. But then the bigger thing is that we know what Dennis Allen wants. And a lot of times what football comes down to at the end of the day is, especially at the college and the NFL level, you're not going out and, signing whoever and bringing in whoever, because there's like the meme with, I think, what is it, like the Seagulls or something, or the Pelicans, where it literally says like Bears question mark, like all over the place, right? Yeah. I don't know what the reference for that is, but the point I think I'm making here is that ultimately at the end of the day, what ends up happening is that you need to bring in D linemen that are going to fit the scheme of what the Bears want to do under Dennis Allen. But the greater talking point here is that, and again, this is something no one's mentioned yet, but your defensive line has to mirror your linebackers. Got it? Meaning those two have to be lockstep. Your front seven has to basically be in lockstep with each other. Mm-hmm. Your secondary has to be in lockstep with the linebackers plus the D-line. But your secondary can't do its job when your front four plus your linebackers are not able to do their job effectively. The Bears know that they've put a hell of a lot of money into the linebacker position with Tremaine Edmonds, potential extension coming for TJ Edwards. Jack Sanborn should get another decent contract this offseason. And so ultimately what this comes down to is saying, all right, well, how can we get closer to rushing just for and upgrading the pass rush to go ahead and allow our highly price linebackers to kind of flourish and do their thing. So this is an upgrade, not just for the DN position and to save money. This is an upgrade just all across the board, trying to help the defense take a next step. Because you know what? Whether or not you like Matt Eberflus, and last point I'm going to make here, whether or not you think Matt Eberflus is a good D coordinator, which I'm in the minority because I don't, the reality for the Bears is this. They did not get the production out of the defense last year that this team hoped, even when Matt Eberflus was calling the defense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like I'm not some like DeMarcus Walker hater, y'all. Like he just is what he is. And there were some people, and again, y'all, I've been pretty sarcastic on Twitter recently. Like you need DeMarcus Walker because look at what the Eagles had in terms of their defensive line rotation. It's like the Eagles had like 5 first-rounders on that D line. Like DeMarcus Walker's not changing that at all. And you don't pay $5 million for a third or fourth D end and a third or fourth D tackle, which honestly I don't think he played as well at D tackle, just maybe rushing. He's basically Chris Williams, where he got pushed off the ball and trying to stop the run. So like you just don't pay $5 million for that. So I mean, I appreciate DeMarcus Walker and as you said, like locker room, and I think he's a funny guy and some leadership, but it's time to get some new blood in here and some guys that are going to fit, which I think this ties in a little bit to we think about this a lot, y'all. We talk about this in the podcast, but me and Usayd talk about it a lot, Twitter a lot. We're in this. We talk about the draft in this offseason a lot. I'm shifting a bit in terms of what I think the strategy of Chicago should be this offseason. So the general strategy should be you need to sign enough guys at some of these spots, O-line, D-line mainly, that you don't go into the draft desperate for a position, then you reach and then you don't get the best player available. But if we look at the draft, man, it's deep at D-end, D-tackle for sure, really deep there. And tight end, running back. Those are the deepest spots. So in my mind, those are the spots that they should not be desperate enough to like, hey, we have to draft these. We have to like draft these guys. So if you think of the opposite of that, O-line is really where they should be signing a lot of free agents. So like a guy that I've mentioned before in terms of like changing my strategy, be like Milton Williams, right? Would be cool to sign from Philly. But if it's deep at D tackle, let's not sign a D tackle for expensive money. You could bring in a BJ Hill or, whatever for a few million, but let's draft one or two D tackles or DNs and then sign O linemen. You know what I mean? So to me, I think like, because you want to try to guess, right? It's a big guessing game, y'all, right? Like last year, they were guessing if Rome was going to be available. Like you're always guessing in these pockets of players. But I think Chicago should be smart in terms of, okay, where should we spend our money? Where do we think guys are going to be at 10, 39, 41, 72? And then you can hopefully make a complete team from that guesstimation.
And speaking of investing like crazy, so I did a mock draft that I dropped at 6:00 this morning, which we're recording on Monday, February 24th. But one of the things that I had in there was this, and I don't think people were necessarily a fan of my approach because some people did sort of take it as, well, you've got them selecting 3 offensive linemen with the first 4 picks, and that really means that the Bears didn't do much of anything in free agency to go ahead and address the draft. And, I had to tweet this afterwards. I said, listen, it's entirely possible that you go offensive lineman at 10, offensive lineman at 39, offensive lineman at 41. And that's assuming free agency plays out in such a way where, let's just say the Bears purge Ryan Bates. The Bears go ahead and say, all right, well, you're out, not really going to cut it anymore. Then they sign Trey Smith in free agency. Well, then my question is, who's your left tackle starter? Because at this point, you have to bring in competition for Braxton Jones, right? See what he's made of. Then you've got Donovan Jackson. And then Gray's Abel. So who's your starter at center? Who's your starter at left guard? And so I know it's a bit of a sort of polarizing mock draft that I did, but it makes sense to go ahead and, potentially take 3 linemen with your first 4 picks, because the reality of it is that the packages in this offense are going to change so much to the point where Ben Johnson is not going to go ahead and always have 5 offensive linemen on the field. He will at times, to me, I look at it and I say he's going to bring in like a 6th offensive lineman, especially when he gets down there in that red zone. And he wants to run some sort of play that requires a tackle pulling across the formation, but then also an extra tackle staying home on the backside. And to me, the biggest beneficiary of the overhaul that the Bears are going to do on the O-line this year is about to be Darnell Wright.
Ooh, yeah. I mean, he's athletic if he moves around and goes in motion and stuff. I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to O-line at 10, 39, 41, just because I think that there's some good ones there. I just want to go BPA as much as possible. And that's why I've even put stuff out there about Genty at 10, which people lose their minds about. But anyway, so here's some free agents, y'all, as we're kind of talking through the strategy, kind of put it together. A couple of free agents that I've mentioned before. And, Trey Smith's out there. Okay. Everyone thinks of Trey Smith, 6'6", 321. He's going to be 26 in June. He's going to be north of 22 million. It's my guess per year. And the thing with Trey Smith is you're going to sign him. He's going to start and we're going to feel comforted. I just don't know what's the best value that's going to be out there for that money. Okay. Like he's good, not great. He's good. 14th among guards in terms of his PFF grade. But here are 2 other guys that I like. So one is Will Fries. Okay. Will Fries is going to be 27 in April, similar guard, broke his leg. So we don't know what his full grade would be, but among 5 games, he was 4th among guards in PFF grade. and you can get him for $8 million less. Okay. So that would be a guy, I think that's not a bad gamble. If you still, like you were saying, draft some guys in the draft, right? Because it's not like we sign one and like, if it doesn't work out, the whole thing falls apart. You want to get depth. You want to go in there. So he's a guy that I wouldn't mind taking a gamble on, that also is young. So it's not like you sign him and it's like, man, he's only got like 2 years left. You could sign him to a 4-year deal and you're expecting him to be good for 3 of those 4 years, if not all of them. The other one is this one. This is probably the most controversial. And we haven't talked about this, so I don't know where you stand on this guy, is Chase Young. Okay. So this isn't, Chase Young was the 2nd overall pick, and that's why I want him. Okay. Chase Young turns 26 in April, so he's young for a pass rusher getting into his prime years. And he's going to cost $17.5 million is what Sport Track had him as, and then PFF has north of 15. So somewhere in that range. Okay. People are like, that's crazy money for Chase Young. He signed $13 million deal as a prove-it deal last year. And what did he do? He was 7th among all DNs in pressures. 7th. So you go through the list, y'all. TJ Watt, right? Myles Garrett, Micah Parsons. That's already 3, right? You go through the list. 7? And he's $17.5 million when those top guys are, man, they're what? High 20s is what new contracts are right now. And he's going to be 26. He's 6'5", 264. We know he's big. We know he's strong. We know he's athletic. It's a gamble because the guys that reach free agency are gambles at this point. But those are 2 guys I think that aren't going to be the top guys that are available, but are still young and promising that Ryan Poles could focus on and that could fill needs for Chicago.
And from Ryan Poles' perspective, signing a guy like Chase Young makes perfect sense. And the reason being is because you're not just getting a player that is young and sort of in his prime. You are also getting a player that is really looking to find a long-term home. Plus, let's be honest about something. I always talk about production matching up production and price, right? The thought process behind signing a underrated player such as a Chase Young at this point where he's at in his career, he's already familiar with Dennis Allen, everything Dennis Allen wants to do. It quite frankly just makes perfect sense. Can't forget the Montez Sweat factor when they were both together in Washington. But the reality of it all is this, is that Chase Young would basically signing Chase Young starts to allow the Bears to really mimic what some of the best teams in the league do. And that is pretty much you have a plethora of really good pass rushers, right? So like Chase Young, Austin Booker, Montez Sweat should be playing 100% of snaps, right? In my opinion, right? Or he should be seeing the field for a very long time. But then the other part of it is this, is that on the other side, let's just say you get a Austin Booker and a Chase Young going. That's a pretty solid 1-2 rotation right there that, depending on down and distance, depending on situation, makes a lot of sense. And you know what? Maybe this is a situation where, again, you sign him to a 2 to 3 year deal, let's say. Let's just say he makes $51 million over 3 years. That's $17 million. It's a 3-year, $51 million deal. You look at it and he outpaces his production. Well, the next year, maybe you do sign him to a little bit of an extension, or the year after that, you sign him to a bit of an extension, basically allowing him to kind of create a home here. So it's a situation to where, you know, Chase Young is a free agent that isn't getting a whole lot of love, but makes a lot of sense for what the Bears are trying to do in terms of you're not trying to break the bank, but you're also trying to go ahead and make sure that you find a pass rusher who's able to get the job done.
Right. And I don't think that he's going to be one of those guys either where it prevents you from getting another edge. Like you mentioned Austin Booker, and that's great, but you look at these teams, they've got multiple going on. And so you could still take an edge at 10, 39, 41, and that way everyone stays fresh. And we've seen them with their pass rush looks. I swear I saw one last year, man, when Austin Booker was on like the interior and he was like, I don't know, off the ball, and then he kind of comes through. They could start multiple of these guys blitzing or pass rushing. So to me, I think it doesn't stop your strategy at all with the draft, but it gives you some comfort because you're like, okay, hey, this guy's going to start or he's going to play a significant amount of snaps. So that way we're not desperate to get an edge, because people have said Khalil Mack, which I understand. Josh Sweat's out there. Josh Sweat, y'all, had more than 10 sacks, I think, once in his career. His Super Bowl performance was really good. I think he had 8 sacks this year. To me, he's going to cost more, and I'm less interested in Josh Sweat, more in Chase Young. And Khalil Mack, 34, best days behind him. It's going to cost a lot. How much are you going to get? Like if he comes in at a bargain, sure, but I don't think he is. So to me, I think the one that interests me the most is Chase Young. If you don't want to go bargain shopping, and then you're going to draft a few guys at edge.
Hear me out, and I totally see this happening. And if it does happen in the NFL world, I will take full credit for it. Just watch Khalil Mack sign with a team like the Chiefs, for example, and they end up getting back to the Super Bowl next year because Steve Spagnuolo with Khalil Mack and Chris Jones would do crazy things. But that's a point for another day. I think the other big thing to kind of keep in mind here is this, and you had mentioned the offense earlier, like the Bears cut Gerald Everett, saving about $5 or $6 million. Mm-hmm. And so that to me also clearly signals that they are looking to overhaul the tight end position. Obviously, don't know what's going to happen with Mercedes Lewis, but at this point, it's either he retires or he's back with the Bears. The other big part of this, though, is that the Bears had high hopes for Gerald Everett last year. Didn't necessarily work out, and now it's a situation where it's a really good tight end class. Do you maybe use a high draft pick on a tight end, or do you kind of go fishing in the free agent market and say, all right, well, we need to find some quality insurance for Cole Kmet, a player that is not going to be a top tier player that's going to take reps away from Cole Kmet, but just a guy that can go ahead and can come in and really have an impact. And again, there's a handful of tight end names out there. All right, Tyler Conklin's 30 years old. Juwan Johnson, well, possibly. Okay, Mo Alley Cox is not going to go and happen, but I think to me, right, one of the names that I would be intrigued with if the Bears do decide to go ahead and bring in a tight end would probably be someone like a Nick Vannett, for example, or even Tommy Tremble from the Panthers, even though Bears fans are not fans of him at all.
Well, one of the things that people don't remember about Detroit is they were one of the deepest tight end rooms in the NFL last year. They were stocked at tight end. So I'm with you. I think tight end 2 is actually a way bigger need than people are recognizing. Some of those guys are good. I wouldn't mind a Harrison Bryant either. He's not a bad guy. So it's someone that Ben Johnson has valued in the past. The other thing I wanted to mention as a need, and people have mentioned the Ashton Genty, there's other guys too I like. I mean, Hampton's good. Caleb Johnson's good. Trayvon Henderson's good. It's a good running back class. Genty is far and away the best in my opinion. But DeAndre Swift, y'all. So one, I know the O-line struggled last year, but Swift struggled too. So he was a guy that I know everyone was really harsh on right away. Then he had a couple of good games, and he just never really seemed to fit. And so here's an advanced stat for you. So NFL.com does this advanced stat where they take into account offensive line. They take into account the defensive box, how many guys are in the front, how the blocks performed, how the defensive front performed. And they have an expected yards or even decimals every single carry. Okay. They determined that minimum of 90 carries for running backs in the NFL last year. DeAndre Swift was the worst in the NFL among yards per carry expected. And so actually I have the stat right here. So he averaged negative 0. Where did it go? That's where I have it. Here it is. Negative 0.69 yards per carry below expected. So, I mean, over 2/3 of a yard less than expected. And then not even going with the best guy. Okay, Joe Mixon. Joe Mixon's old. Joe Mixon was 19th in the NFL in this stat, and he was plus 0.37. So between those two, that's another yard every carry, just getting the 19th best running back. So I think design, Ben Johnson will get more out of Swift or whoever's back there, but I think running back is a bigger need, and there's a lot in this class, and we've talked about Chicago getting a running back at 10, 39, 41, 72, wherever. But I think getting a running back in Chicago and getting more than below expected, I mean, even just hitting average would be helpful, y'all. It's going to help Caleb Williams in the offense, right? So when you stay ahead of the chains, then you're not in third and long, and then all of a sudden all this pressure on the offensive line. So it kind of goes, hand in hand there.
Yeah, it certainly does. And, you just broke down why the Bears have to get more explosive on the ground. So there is, we'll talk about some of the running backs in the draft later on. But one of the other big things that I would even look at on this concept of running backs in free agency is you start looking at the list here, and it's like, all right, well, someone on Bears Twitter decided to say Rico Dowdle. Cam Akers is a name that's out there. AJ Dillon, Nick Chubb. Najee Harris is obviously the one that is going to want a big contract, which, it's worth mentioning. The running back class this year in free agency is not as good as the last one. And that to me pretty much means that don't expect to see crazy high paydays. But if there was a guy that I would choose, if there were two players I would choose, the first guy I'd look at is Patrick Taylor from the 49ers because he's 27. He only played like 16% of the snaps last year. And so he's a player that I look at and I'm like, okay, well, not a lot of tread on the tires. The other one, which would be a more polarizing signing, would be Javonte Williams. Again, 4-year starter, played with the Broncos for 4 years, is 5'10", 220, and he's only, 24 years old. He'll be 25 by the time the 2025 season rolls around, being a former second-round pick. He's had some solid years with Denver, but again, with a lot of the changes this year in terms of what Sean Payton was doing, or I should say in 2024 with what Sean Payton was doing, Javonte Williams now becomes, I think, this wild card option for the Bears. And I think we're also forgetting that you just hired his former tight ends coach as your offensive coordinator. So there's going to be a lot of bonus intel there that the Bears are going to have on Javonte Williams.
All right, man. This might be our first big disagreement on the pod. Here we go. Javonte Williams, in that same stat that I mentioned earlier, so Swift was negative 0.69. Javonte Williams was negative 0.6, so he was third worst in the NFL last year. I feel like his explosiveness has been zapped because of injuries. He's a big guy. He runs hard. Denver had a good O-line, and he still didn't really get it done. You mentioned a few of those. One I would mention is Dowdle. I think Dowdle obviously played better than people expected last year. He was 0.27 in terms of that stat. So between those two, you're almost getting a full yard if you want with Dowdle. But I think they should probably save their money if they can't get a bargain at running back. But as we're heading in, kind of ending this pod though, is people are looking at players for Chicago through the combine. And again, like I said, deep at D line, I would go look heavily at D end. You mentioned a few names earlier. Will they go the big guys that you mentioned? Also Jelon Walker might be able to play D end. He's a little smaller. We'll see what he measures in at. Michael Williams is big. James Pierce, long. Mike Green. I'm not going to get his name right. Donovan Zikaru, I think, from Boston College. I watched some of his tape, man. Super technical with a lot of moves. I don't know if he's a high-end athlete or not, but in terms of Austin Booker, we talked about if you sign Chase Young, you want to get still a fourth edge. He would be a fun guy to mix and sprinkle in terms of pass rush. So I would look heavily at D ends, y'all, when you're watching the combine. D tackles for sure, and O-line. Those are kind of the three, and then pay attention to some running backs because who knows what they'll end up doing adding to that room.
And on the concept of using the combine, there is with the 4 picks in the top 100 this year, really inside the top 75, the major benefit of that ultimately becomes that you can come out of this thing with 4 starters, right? I know some people are going to say, oh, well, you're crazy about it, blah, blah, blah. But listen, there's a very legit chance that within the first 4 picks, the Bears have a starting offensive or defensive lineman. They have 2 starting players in the second round. And then that third round pick, which is 72 right now, I think, they end up going ahead and they end up taking a starting running back. That is a very legitimate possibility. Yeah. And to me, the way that I look at this is you have to use free agency to sort of supplement the draft. But what does that mean specifically? It means that you're using free agency to get those under the radar bargain buys. And then you're going ahead and you're striking big in the draft. Like, to me, what that means is this: is let's just say you get to round 2 and you've overhauled the O-line in free agency. Well, with 39 and 41, because you have the 2 really good picks. Well, because you've got 2 really high picks. Let's just say you overhaul the O-line in free agency. Hey, if there is a opportunity for you there, and I know it's not going to be a popular opinion, but if there's an opportunity for you there to take a damn good tight end that you can kind of groom to eventually be Cole Kmet's replacement, I would not be mad at that. And I know someone's going to start with the Adam Shaheen, blah, 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 but like, I would be totally okay with, a Tyler Warren or a Mitchell Evans or a Harold Fannin Jr. And then with that second round pick, let's just say you do go ahead and say, all right, well, we really want to take a defensive lineman here. And this is assuming you go all lineman first. Then you go ahead and you pull the trigger, because last point I'll make here, but the way that the draft works every single year is there's always these players that are quote unquote projected by the fans to be a first round pick that always end up sliding into the first, basically, let's just say 15 picks of the second round every year. And then the conversation Thursday going into Friday is, oh my God, like how did this guy end up falling to round 2?
Yep. Cooper DeJean is one. I mean, like Cole Kmet, I think, was one of those guys. Like, there's a lot of those guys every year. And this class, y'all, like, I just read a thing this morning Albert Breer put out. He always has a lot of rumors, and they talk to a lot of guys. Like, there's very few blue chip guys. Abdul Carter's one. You could say probably Mason Graham, Travis Hunter. Another one is Genty. So, like, that's why, like, when people talk about it, it's like, you're going to get a for sure good guy. And then there's going to be some very good guys, but there might only be 12 first round grades, 15 maybe. So that last part of the first round that you're talking about and the first part of the second round, I think there's going to be a big group of guys that are solid. They could be starters. I don't know that they're all pros. They could be starters, but that some guy's going to go and then some guys are going to fall. Like, how did this guy fall? Well, because the board is pretty equal. Now, I think that second round and maybe into the third round, like, it's fairly deep with some potential starters, but those high-end guys aren't there. So you're going to see maybe some teams trade up because, like, hey, I really like only these few guys, or they might just wait and they're like, there's a big group and I can just get whoever falls to me, like at D tackle. Like, I don't have to go up and reach to get, whoever the guy is after Mason Graham, whether it's Walter Nolan or whether it's Kenneth Grant, etc., because I can just wait and get somebody else later, like a TJ Sanders.
Exactly, and that's why, over the next basically 2 months here, we are going to be breaking every single situation and scenario down, talking to reporters that cover other teams, getting some intel on what other franchises across the league are thinking. Before we get out of here, make sure you like, subscribe, and comment to the video on YouTube. Give the podcast a 5 stars on, and a really good review on whatever platform you listen to. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at Halas, at Usayd, Koshul, _ Nick Whalen. We'll be back later this week with another video, a lot more combine storylines coming out as the combine sort of heats up. But until then, enjoy your Monday night or your Tuesday, and bear down.